If you're paying attention to news announcements, the industry, particularly the tech industry, has seen an absolute slew of layoffs in the past couple of weeks. We're talking about really big names like Roku and Amazon, Facebook, Salesforce, all kinds of big tech companies are starting to lay people off. And I think this is just a further signal that we're going to hit a pretty tough recession here coming up in a little bit. But today I want to share with you a couple of factors that impact whether or not a business or a company will undergo layoffs, so that if you're worried about that where you're working, you can kind of keep an eye out for it. And the first factor you really need to consider is just poor economic conditions. And this is globally, it works for every industry that's out there. But if your country, in our instance, the United States, is going through tough economic conditions, then it's more likely that the business or the company that you work for is going to see some signs that they need to start paring back expenses in order to stay alive. Then the second one you have to focus on is poor financial performance. This is particularly easy if you work for a publicly traded company. You can pull up their annual reports. Because they're publicly traded, they have to be available, and you can see how your company is performing on a consistent basis. The next factor to think about is investor pressure. So this best example of this was recently one of Facebook's or Meta's investors actually published an open letter to them and was encouraging them to go ahead and do wide sweeping layoffs in order to be able to survive the upcoming challenges economically. And sure enough, a week or so ago after that open letter was published out on Twitter, Meta went ahead and did their layoffs as well. So when you're getting pressure from investors, particularly investors that probably hold large sums of money in your business, it's more likely that you're going to have to do layoffs in order to survive or appease those investors. Now, if you work for a privately held company, you can't easily know these types of things, but private investors will also put squeezes on companies in a similar fashion. It just may be less public and behind the scenes. But just watching for investor mood, investor sentiment in companies will usually key you off to the things that you have to worry about with the company that you work for. Another thing to watch for is what I call austerity measures. That's usually a term reserved for what our government will do when there's tough economic times. But companies will do the same thing. And so what I mean by austerity measures is starting to cut expenses. And one of the first places that you might see this is going to be when they cut travel budget and things like that. So if you notice that your company is starting to cut its travel budget, that's an easy place to kind of save money. A lot of companies learned coming out of the pandemic that they didn't need as large of a travel budget as they had before in order to be successful. And so some of them will start to cut travel. They may cut other expenses, so frivolous expenses. So if you're at a startup and they've been offering maybe a wine bar or, all these great snacks for free all these time, and those start to kind of dwindle or be taken away or be limited, you might ask yourself, is this an austerity measure where they're starting to cut expenses to try and stay alive? Another thing you have to watch for is hiring freezes. Now, this tends to come ahead of layoffs. So what a company will do is they may have open job requisitions, and they'll just go ahead and freeze all of those and not add new headcount to the company. This is actually one of the reasons all of these tech companies are now having to do layoffs, is because they got a little overexcited and they overhired, and now they're having to let people go. And so sometimes you will see inside a company that is trying to cut expenses, they will go ahead and lock out new headcount, and then that oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes can lead into layoffs. The other thing to watch for is just what interest rates are doing, right? Is to take a look at interest rates, see if they're going up like they have been recently. The Fed's been raising interest rates, and when that happens, cost of capital to businesses that want to borrow money becomes more expensive, and so you're just adding an extra expense to the bottom line that the business can't afford. So these are all things that you can be monitoring for. Don't be blind to them. I personally have been laid off 3 different times in my life. The first time it happened was not a lot of fun. The second time it was even less fun, and the third time even less fun from there. So it can be tough. I'm totally with you. If you're one of the people that has been laid off, if there's something I can do to help you, put a comment below. If it's introductions you're looking for and I can make those introductions, I'd be happy to do it for you. So I get how tough it can be. I don't want you to have blinders on. I want you to monitor what's going on in the economy, monitor what's going on inside your company, get a feel for those things. You don't have to be at the upper level. You don't have to be a director at a big company to understand what's going on. A lot of times, some of these things can be found no matter what level of employee you are at the company. Or maybe just ask your manager if you have a great relationship with them. Hopefully, they're more than willing to be really candid with you. Watch for these signs and know what your options are. You may get lucky enough to get a nice severance package, but if you feel like layoffs are coming, it could be worth just going ahead and talking to other companies and seeing what options are available. If you were someone who did that was part of these tech layoffs, you got ahead of this mass wave of people that were getting laid off. Now we're looking at, tens of thousands of people who have been laid off, and now they're all competing for typical same types of jobs since they've all been in tech. So if you can get ahead of that, if you really feel nervous about the potential of being laid off, go ahead and start the interview process, and that will give you optionality in your professional career. Hope that helps. Try not to worry about this too much. Everything changes. The economy always goes up, it always goes down, and it always comes back up again. So just hang in there.